Hi and welcome to the Game of Inches podcast, where one small insight can make all the difference. I'm Nigel Collin, and today we talk with Darren Kerr. Now, Darren and I first met way back in the early 2000s when he was event producer of Australia's largest ever corporate event and asked me to be his show director. And we've kept in touch ever since. And in today's conversation, Darren talks about the importance of collaboration, creativity, and of authentic human connection in fostering and empowering innovation and driving outcomes. Certainly hope you'll enjoy it. I certainly know you'll get a lot of insight from it. So, let's begin. Rather than sort of starting at point A and going to point B, let's start point B and look back. So where you are now, you're living in the UAE, you've worked on copious, massive events all around the planet. Looking back when we first met each other, which was 2000, around there somewhere. Yeah. Could you ever have imagined the path you've been on now?
No, I thought I'd still be working, in client management and producing an AV or something else, maybe go to an advertising agency a lot of things that I do now, particularly in this strategy space. I didn't even know what strategy was. I just thought it was common sense. And in a way, that's kind of what strategy is. But also, I remember working with yourself and, Absurd Entertainment, and, the booking of entertainment. And, one of the reasons that I really gravitated to yourself and your team was there was plenty of people that could book off-the-shelf entertainment. But what you guys were doing was a much more, and at the time, it was actually quite innovative. Now it's kind of standard. But back then, it was kind of off-the-shelf stuff. And what you guys did is you kind of took the brief and worked collaboratively with people like myself and created solutions or entertainment that actually, would actually enhance and elevate whatever the experience was we were designing. And I think that genuinely collaborative and collegiate sort of, experience building, I think the industry has evolved now, because when we started back in the day, it was 35 mm slides where you had to encourage clients to actually put it under glass rather than just on plastic. And, I remember I did a project for when the Brisbane Lions first started in the AFL, and I used to do their award night, and it'd be 35 to 40 slide projectors all mounted up, all with the individual racks, and it was all controlled off a cassette tape with a data tom control. And now, we're doing projects where it's all AI. It's the engineering side it's almost like going into a NASA, space control. And you're kind of only really limited by your imagination, your client's courage and appetite, and expertise. And so it's completely different, So back in the day, there was no schools for event business. We all just found our way. Now they're doing degrees and masters in it. So I think it is extraordinary. And so to answer your question, no, I had no idea. But I think one of the things too, I suspect you probably had a better plan than I did, but I just the one thing that I was always good at was when opportunity knocked, I had an ear for it and I opened the door. And even if I was not confident about it or didn't know exactly I had no real, maybe I'm just foolish, but I just stepped through the door. And I've had great success from that, but I've also had some terrible disasters by stepping through that door, but it's never been dull.
I don't. Maybe I had a plan. It's a long time ago. I was quite green and fresh and like that, often didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to get it done, I suppose. But yeah, I remember working with you on that large gig, the Amway gig, thinking, yeah, right, I'll just follow him. Because you're there if you know what you're doing.
Of course, now I was making it up as I was going and just had the good blag. But yeah, but you know what? We had the right people and the good people that were all motivated and aligned. And we also had a client that was challenging, but they did do something that a lot of clients now, I think clients have become a lot more driven by the P&L side of things and a lot more risk-averse, is that Amway understood that this was all about creating a an experience, but a genuine experience. And some of it, you and I didn't quite understand why they wanted to do certain things from a cultural point of view that had high value. But we also went on the journey with our clients by saying, well, okay, we'll run with that and let's see how it goes. And
the other nice thing about that, and I don't know if this is rare or whatever, but there was a client, as you were as well, but there was a client who kind of said, "This is what we want to do, make it so." And it was kind of like it was like they trusted us or trusted you, who then trusted us to get that done, rather than micromanaging. I'm sure in the background there was a lot of that. Uh,
yeah,
but it was kind of like, for me anyway, on that job, you were almost a really nice buffer to let me, because, well, I don't know, we had, what, 200 performers on it or something?
yeah,
I remember there was that buffer of, I can just focus on doing what I'm doing, and you were kind of, there was that hierarchy of command, and within that ability to let the people you're working with do what they do.
yeah. And I
Instead
think
of
you're
aligning.
right. And that really has been my management style. I've not only run big businesses, but also managed agencies. And I've always, I mean, people say it, but they very rarely do it, is I literally surround myself with the best people possible, whether they're staff or subcontractors or advisors, whoever it may be. But also we were talking before we started recording about being comfortable with being uncomfortable is a really important philosophy for me, because quite often it is you're stepping up a ledge with people, and you're kind of hoping and praying that they've packed the parachute based off their experience and skills. Sometimes it doesn't work, but a lot of times it does. And I think that empowerment benefits everyone, and we all elevate. So people I worked on over the last 15, 20 years are now, I'm working for them in some cases. They've done fantastic. Some people not. It wasn't for them, for that business, and I get that. It is a hard business, but yeah, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Is that, leading question, is that relatively unique? Is it rare? Do you see it a lot?
I think in practice it is. I think a lot of people like to sort of throw things out, and but I think actually genuinely following through on that is a difficult thing for most people to do, because people, by and large, will do anything to avoid unpleasant circumstances, the unknown, any sort of threats. We're incredibly good as people in terms of inbuilt risk mitigation. And a good example is I am the worst networker possible. A lot of people know me, and I rely when I go out that people will come and talk to me, because I am absolutely terrible at going up to people and introducing myself and networking. Yet people assume, because I know a lot of people, that I'm good at it. That's not the case. The case is that when I do make a connection, I invest a huge amount of time in being present and actually showing genuine curiosity and interest in them. And it's their referral. They end up becoming my wingmen or wingwomen, and kind of networking on my behalf. It's terribly lazy, and sort of it shows a huge amount of kind of, I'm not. I should be much better at that, but the reality is, I don't think I ever will be. It's kind of like, when we do pitching, right? I can get in front of huge audiences and pitch, but to actually then go one on one is much more challenging. I much prefer a bigger room than a smaller room.
Oh, any day of the week.
Yeah.
Any day of the week. Hey, does that, because you've thrown me on that, because I had always assumed you're a fantastic networker.
I'm well networked. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. Or no, let me rephrase that. It doesn't mean I'm comfortable with it. So maybe I should take my own mandate and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, which I do. So I do actually push myself out to go and do networking. But it's, I think the other thing is too. I think this may be an age thing, Nigel, but I always feel that I'm always in awe of business development guys that are just kind of completely appear to me to be shameless and able to go and card people and do what they do. But I don't know. I mean, people are there because they do want to meet people and they network. It's me or people like me that hold yourselves back. I don't know. It's a challenge. It's human nature, isn't it?
Can I ask you, like me, you're, because I'm an introvert, you know,
Yeah, me too. Well,
Yeah,
what is it? The one in between introvert and extrovert, where people think you're an extrovert, but in reality, you're actually an introvert. There's,
I think
there's a third
there
now.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what that's called, but you'll often find actors and comedians and speakers are quite introverted. Hey, can we go? Because you've always been very fascinated and good with I want to say creativity, but nurturing that from people and working with people and
Mm.
collaboration and the rest of it. What's the key to that, you reckon? Because I often think most people don't feel heard with their ideas, or they don't think their ideas are any good. Or, if you're working with a producer or a director or, a CEO, that often your ideas are going to be either stolen or not heard, or and you've been very good at sort of tapping into the genius of other people and really taking that. What's the secret in that? Because we can talk about collaboration, but it's deeper than that, I think.
I think it is. I think it comes down to, we mentioned before about age and not being as precious about things as you get
Mm.
mature, because you understand it kind of, it's self-harming in some ways. But I think from a management point of view, the what I do anyway, and it seems to work, is it's about being heard, but being honest and acknowledgement. And by that I mean being heard is people bring very different worldviews. And it may be not specifically event expertise, it may be an expertise outside of the event space that adds to it. It can be a cultural expertise. A recent project I did was an extraordinary number of people from Lima and Peru were on it. And they had a fantastic people, but they had a completely different outlook to me.
Mm.
And it was kind of me, not on them, to accommodate for that and to embrace it. I mentioned about a water engineer that I hired that actually turned out to be one of the best operations people I worked on within events, even though he had no background in events, but the skill set was transferable. But he was much better at doing event operation because he didn't work in it. But I think so. Part of that is the worldview and being heard. But I think there's a lot of these kind of tropes about. There's no such thing as a bad idea. Well, I can categorically say there is absolutely bad ideas,
I
but,
totally agree.
but yeah, but let's get them out there and kill them, right? Let's just get them out there and we'll address that. And I think part of that is if people are comfortable that they know that they're going to be heard, and it's not going to be a personal attack, and it is managed with genuine good intentions and care. People are okay with that, and I think that leads to the second part about people knowing that you've got their back. And I think part of that leads to the third one about acknowledgement. I often get great ideas, and I think you actually phrased this about, shepherding cats or, managing monkeys.
Herding
Like
monkeys and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's it. Yeah, I think that's one of those things. As a good manager, having everyone in the zoo, being cared for and kind of doing what they do best, is a secret. And I think part of that is being okay with that acknowledgement part. So if someone has a great idea, I always make a point of not only recognizing that and thanking them, but also I try to be very generous about that by saying this idea was from this person and it was fantastic, rather than kind of trying to own that or diminish it in some way. So it's about recognition. It cost me nothing, and in fact, what I want to do is I want this person to continue to contribute ideas, but also I want them to feel as though they're validated because they are.
I wonder if a lot of people, because you're right, a lot of people will hear someone's idea and they'll masquerade it as their own. They may not say it's their idea, but it will look that. Do you reckon that's just a fear of looking stupid or dumb? Because I actually always thought someone who attributes good ideas or effort to other people is probably the smarter person in the room. Like if you're
I think
brave enough to recognize and acknowledge the creativity of someone else, for me, that just elevates you as a leader in my eyes.
It, absolutely. It doesn't in any way diminish yourself or the group or the individual that came up with the idea. In fact, it actually elevates everyone as a group. So it's kind of like the rising sea, all boats, rise.
Hmm.
It actually benefits everyone. And I have come across in some countries where there is a cultural protocol hierarchy where it's not encouraged below the leadership level to have an idea or to speak out of turn, and if they did have good ideas, it's quickly snaffled up and repurposed. And I think I kind of I accept it for what it is. It's a cultural. It's not how I work, but I accept that.
Mm.
I personally, client claims my idea or the team's idea. I don't actually really care. I think it's a fairly poor reflection on them in terms of them on a personal level. But I don't really care as long as the idea gets up and runs. But I think from a long term point of view, those people tend to box themselves in terms of their options on projects or life or their business side because people just stop contributing and then they're pretty much they're stuffed. So to me,
Mm.
uh, being generous of heart in a genuine way it benefits everyone.
Do you reckon- I've always thought that, we talk about there's no such thing as a stupid idea, and there is. Right. I
Yeah,
remember when I used to go to I don't know if I did it with you, but I remember a lot of clients, I'd pitch one idea that was really conservative, one idea that was completely, what the hell were you on when you thought of that? And one idea that was relatively stupid. And I'd do it to gauge where they're at, kind of thing.
yeah.
But I've always thought behind every stupid idea, there's a thought about process. What got you to that idea? What were you thinking behind that idea? And if we just dismiss it, we lose this potential
Yeah,
of good
I
stuff.
agree. I think part of the key is, and you know, I've got a lot. I've had a lot of clients where they're quite conservative and they're risk adverse, and they end up getting, from an events point of view, they end up delivering fairly cookie cutter standard events, and then they wonder why the attendance wasn't great, or the feedback wasn't great, or the engagement
Mm.
wasn't great. A classic example is, a lot of corporates will they just want to have keynotes from their management team. And it becomes this long advertorial, and you kind of go, oh dear Lord, no one really cares. They can watch, they can see that off your website. And so I'm a great advocate of fireside chats and panel conversations and different formats where there is a lot greater intimacy and engagement because that's something you can't replicate off a website or webinar well. And actually, people go to events to hear other people's learnings and experiences. And the more experiences you can share, and you've got to manage it, obviously, you don't want too many people all talking at the same time. But it is a much more meaningful and beneficial thing for both the panelists and the audience. But it takes courage. And that's the biggest thing that I find the determination between a good client and a client is their individual and their organizational or institutional courage. And I was quite blessed. I worked with a company called EMC, who has since been purchased by Dell, and they were right at the forefront of cloud storage back in the day. And I did about 8 years back to back of their huge annual events with people like Phil Davis, who
Yeah.
Tony McKerney, and that was fabulous because they made the money available to deliver something exceptional because they showed commitment and skin to the game. But they also, they had a couple of things that they needed to address, obviously from a procurement and from a compliance and HR requirement and things like that, all those sort of box ticking. But ultimately, they wanted to genuinely create an event that you could not get if you didn't attend. And a lot of people say that, but a lot of people don't do it. These guys showed the courage by actually empowering us to the point that often they didn't even know where the event was going to be staged or what it was going to look like. And we did things like on the Great Wall of China. We were the first corporate event to ever be staged at Angkor Wat in Siem Reap.
I
We
remember
did
that post. I
that's it.
remember
There you go.
seeing that post.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the only reason we could do all of that was that courage. And the important thing is with that particular client, it was it was something that is incredibly difficult these days with the rise of the power of procurement, where that you can't quantify, and that is the human engagement, the emotional attachment between staff. It was a staff incentive or high performing staff incentive.
Mm.
It was about retention, and it was about these things that yes, you're paid really well, you're going to get these big bonuses, but as well, you're going to be, if you're a high performer, you're going to not only be recognized and acknowledgement, you're going to be sent on this extraordinary event where you can bring your partner. And initially, we also had their children come as well. We had to stop the children bit because it became unmanageable on so many different levels. But we did this huge thing, and what they did the sums, and they kind of worked out that actually any of these high performers were solely responsible for such a huge amount of their business that if they lost it to their competitors, all this future income would go out the door. But by investing in something that was really meaningful, that their partners would go, you are valued, and this is extraordinary. They'd not only retained the actual staff member, but more importantly, they retained the most important person, which is the partner that's supporting them. And it became a massive success. Unfortunately, they got bought by Dell, and we no longer do that. But it was an extraordinary thing.
That is extraordinary. It leads me to ask. So obviously, apart from all your event work, we were talking earlier about your consulting or advising work in the areas of change management, strategy. Those which are pretty high end areas. Is what do you reckon? A lot of that. I mean, obviously, you've kind of naturally gravitated towards that right from the start. But is what you've experienced and learned through events been a catalyst for that? Because I often look back at the events I've done and what I've learned just from listening to people or observing is huge, right? So has that been a good stepping stone
Oh,
to the consulting
100,
side?
yeah, 100%. Because at the end of the day, um, it's not about org charts and spreadsheets and gap analysis and all that sort of the tools of the trade. It's about people. And that's if I was in any other business and I was looking to engaging people, and I was open to thinking out of the box, I'd be hiring event people because they're hardworking, they think outside the box, they're creative, they're extraordinarily resilient, they're naturally collaborative, they're not precious, they most of them have good sense of humor, but what they do is they bring the one single thing that it is really difficult to replicate, and that is a sense of curiosity. They always ask the question, right? Because they're naturally curious, but also they're really good at understanding people. And ultimately, you can take everything about business away from it. It's about people. You know, Apple, has has had fantastic products. They're evolving with their changes, but they're fantastic showrooms, great technology. The old thing. I remember when the first Apple came out. You had it because it all worked. But a key part of that is that when you deal with Apple, when you go into one of their showrooms, it's all of the individuals and the experts that are there. You don't need to actually kind of go elsewhere. You're going to be looked after and sorted at whatever level you require. And they actually understand it is about acknowledgement. They come back and they keep you updated on where you're at. They will do follow-ups. They'll frame the expertise or the solutions to whoever they're talking with. So I will say, Apple is a great technologist company, but actually I would suggest they're a great people company. And that's a good example where a lot of businesses forget that, and it's bad for business and it's bloody annoying.
For anyone listening or watching this should pause, take notes on what you. Yeah. I don't know if you read. I did a post recently. Belinda, my wife and I recently stayed at a place called the Anchorage, which is a resort here, South Wales.
I remember seeing that. Yeah, at the
The
service.
service was
Yeah.
exceptional, and you and I stay at a lot of places, right? And I asked, "Well, how do you do that?" And he went, "We really focus. You can have the best facilities, the best products. We focus on creating that human connection and experience." It's exactly what you just.
But to be fair, Nigel, if you spoke to any hotel, they would say the exact same thing.
Yeah, but they
But
don't.
this is the killer. They don't follow through.
Correct.
That's the killer part, is they don't follow through. Every company has a mission statement, right? And all of their values and all that stuff. But do they actually walk the talk? And that is actually the determinator, isn't it? We were talking before about the one of the key things that I find is a good indicator of whether a customer or a client is going to have a successful outcome on whatever we're engaging with, and that is that being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being able to embrace change and step through that opportunity door, as it were. And most say they are, but they're not. But the key thing is, it's not just that change or that transition, which can be quite painful. It can be distressing if it's not managed well. Change is good, inevitable, but it doesn't mean that's a comfortable process. But that's only half the story. The real story is, are you in a position to actually deal and accommodate with the outcome of the change? And that's the bit that actually most companies, even if they get through the first hurdle and can manage change, most are unable to actually deal with the change that they get at the end. You know, it's that old saying that your mum probably said, which is, be careful what you wish for because you might well get it.
Yeah.
There you know,
So
and that's the key, Pet.
that's so good. That's so good because you're right. Everyone, it's interesting. I find what's interesting is the word change has changed. During
Yeah,
COVID pivot. Um,
yeah,
Now it's transformation. Um,
yeah,
but each of
yeah.
those focus on the process of, not the outcome. Actually, what you've said is really
Well,
refreshing.
can I ask you a question? You know, you
No,
mentioned about COVID
no,
and the
this is my
pandemic.
podcast.
No, doesn't
Go
work
on.
that way. But
Go on.
I reckon the pandemic, right, was absolutely dire for the world, but particularly the events industry, hospitality, entertainment, where it lives and dies by human engagement, right? We all just went to a sudden stop.
Yep.
And the events industry kind of pivoted reasonably fast, I thought, into the to the virtual event space.
Oh,
And I remember prior to the pandemic, I used to try to encourage clients to take a hybrid approach by providing an experience that you could only get by being there in person, right? Because I wanted to preserve that, but also l- leveraging their product or the event experience through post-event online, libraries in terms of participating in certain public classes or master classes that would be open to those people that
yep.
can't get there. So to extend on the audience, I had terrible time trying to encourage people to do that, and a lot of the virtual guys, went with me on that journey, and most kind of barely made a living. And then in a year, they were buying houses and second holiday homes and things. But it then kind of, after the pandemic finished, we all rushed back to actually press the flesh and see each other again, and that was inevitable, I thought. But then the all of those people that had invested in both virtual technology and companies that had kind of pivoted into that were kind of left going, well, what next? And
Mm,
it's still out there, but it kind of got dropped. And I think one of the things that this was my feel, is one of the things that they missed was the virtual event side was always sold as a cost-effective, cheap way to do events, and that was the big sale point. And the problem is that the audience were expecting broadcast level stuff that they would see on TV. Things like captions under
yep.
the thing, host, music, soundtracks. Really high-end production, which
Lovely
none of that exists.
transitions and yeah.
So my question to you is, setting that scene, um, is there still a space for hybrid events in that virtual space, or is it dead, or is there a premium offer that's still there, or what's your feel? I mean, you present an awful lot. You're one of the stars on stage. How do you feel about that?
I actually think there is still room, and I think there is a lot of opportunity yet to be figured out exactly how we're going to do it
Mm,
in the hybrid world. And I say that from a couple of points. First, you never the face to face pressing the hand is like if you have a meeting, you try to do it in person. If we lived in the same town, we'd be doing this live, right?
yeah.
So you're never going to beat that. But I think where the virtual hybrid piece is good is, especially in events, the lead up and post event, because events
Mm,
quite often are a standalone, right? We spend our
mm,
$500,000 or whatever it is to have our conference. Then what happens? And I think there's a benefit in easing people into an event using video, using virtual somehow. And that could take many forms, such as some online short videos or webinars to pike some interest to get everyone ready. But then there's, I think, more importantly, how do you keep the momentum going? How do we keep the
mm,
learning going? So I think there's a huge benefit in that. And I know, the other space I'm working in more and more is learning and development. That's
mm,
becoming a really important piece of the puzzle, because otherwise what we have is a standalone piece.
mm,
And I don't think we've quite figured it out yet. I think that's
mm,
a steep learning curve, but I do think there's a massive, massive opportunity there. And also, just as you and I are talking online now, the technology has got quite good, but there's
mm,
always at an event people who can't get there. There is that benefit as well. So, look, my view is I think the hybrid model will figure it out. But I do
mm,
think the world is more connected now. COVID has shifted us. I will always be an advocate for live events, absolutely
mm.
always.
Yeah.
But I do think we can add that digital presence or that online presence to enhance it. And you
Do you
probably
think with
with something like an Amway, because that was so
yeah,
experiential. How do you do that? You can't
mm, oh,
cast it
yeah.
out. It just doesn't equal the same experience. But I think from a learning point of view, with an organization trying to get their strategy across or whatever they're doing or a product launch, there is a piece to play if we're clever and we know how to use it in an engaging way, as
I think
opposed
the Amway
to
a good example where, you know, you're right. I mean, it's extraordinary, and it's definitely a if you weren't there in person, you kind of missed out. But
Mm,
I think there's a lost opportunity there. And to be fair, back in the this is going back 20 odd years, but the lost opportunity to me was quite profound in that there was a lot of actual workshops that were done about how to sell the product better and product understanding that weren't really leveraged post, but also a lot of experiences. Yes, we did, a sizzle reel where, here was great, but in fact, it could have been a lot more highly personalized to different people from different regions within China, and that could have been extended out. And I kind of, to me, the solution for virtual is having that as just as featuring as a key part of the tool from the overall planning of the event. And I think part of that planning of the event needs to be much more about. I'm actually a big advocate on less
mm,
events, believe it or not. I actually think doing a huge volume of events, unless it is literally training, that more functional event space, you're better off not doing a lot of events. You're better off actually clubbing your money and doing one single event, but doing it as a legacy event, as an annual event that you can then
yeah,
embed
okay.
the success and the history. So you build that mofo in, you can extend that out, but that's where the virtual side then allows you, as you've rightly pointed out, extends the environment or the landscape of that signature event across the year. Um,
Yeah, and I think the other thing coming back to, we started talking early about briefing, and
mm,
oh, that's interesting. Being curious. I think for me, virtual is always only use it if it's going to be of benefit, if it helps you achieve your purpose or the objective of the gig. Because it's very tempting. And I think we saw this at the end of COVID. Everyone was using virtual because they could. And you kind of go, yeah, but that's just like using a magician because you can. Like,
mm.
why? So I think we have to
You
get
think,
we have to sit in the problem longer. And if virtual or hybrid fits and can help, great. But if not, don't go there just because you think you should. But that's true
yeah,
for anything, right?
yeah. Well, I agree. I agree. I think it's a it's both an agency and a client maturity indicator in terms of their
Mm.
strategic outlook on the project. And one of the things I experienced, we've been in this business now a long time, and so we talked about starting with slide projectors to three gun projectors to now projectors that you could literally hold in your hand, and you
Yeah,
know,
lead
uh,
world, you
or
know.
that are extraordinary stuff. But I think one of the things is that people's default to get out of having good programming and event strategy, and event marketing strategy is relying on the silver bullet, going for the doohickey gimmickry to get them out of jail. And, fireworks was back in the day when we first started, fireworks was the big one, right? And then it became holograms that came out and died. Virtual was there for a moment. And I think even now, we've just gone through this period where choreographed drones were the big thing. And I have to say, if anyone tries to sell a drone show here in the UAE, these guys do them all the time. It is just another tool. And unless it's spectacular, no one really cares anymore because people get very desensitized to these things. And so I think all of that reliant on the tech or the gimmickry part it's a bit of a fool's errand. And I think, the focus needs to be much more about good storytelling and actual targeting really genuine engagement between what you're programming or presenting and what the audience's interests are, their needs, but also what they're going to actually find engaging. And that's the challenging part. And that's
Mm.
what people like EMC did so well, is they understood that part. But because of this age of procurement, it's almost virtually impossible to quantify that X factor.
Yeah, everything's becoming commoditized,
Yeah.
uh, which makes it very difficult. I've always been a big proponent and of what are we trying to actually do? How we do it's almost secondary.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to execute well. You've got to come up with something that's really going to, but seriously, whatever you do has to somehow serve the overall objective. And I think, um, and that's
And,
why,
and of course, yeah. What,
um,
what you're going to do is triggered by how you feel.
yeah.
You're not going to do anything unless you've got an emotional trigger. Intellectually, there's also a validation process as well. But by and large, no one's ever going to buy a car based just purely off their intellectual validation. They're going to buy it based on their emotional engagement, whatever that may be. So, and that's the hard quantifiable part. The intellectual part you can kind of validate,
Mm.
but that X factor part, it's bloody
But,
hard.
mate,
Yeah,
thank you. And again, like I say, it goes back the other way, right back to working with you. It's like, it's always been easy.
yeah, should be,
All right,
should be. All
mate,
right,
next
thanks,
time.
mate. See ya. Bye bye.
Thanks for joining me on the Game of Inches podcast. Please make sure you subscribe. Talk soon.